Tipp FM's Tipp Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Over half a century driving the people of Tipperary and surrounding areas with quality, reliable and economical vehicles, new and used. Call the sales team today to discuss your next car or van on 067 24111.
Thanks, Pat, and welcome back to the final hour of Tipp Today. Now, the Alice Leahy Trust will mark its 50th anniversary with the launch of a commemorative book called Outsiders, 50 years of the Alice Leahy Trust in Dublin tomorrow. And the feathered woman, Alice Leahy, joins me now. Good morning to you, Alice.
Good morning, Fran.
And lovely to talk to you, and lovely to hear your voice on Tipp
Thank
FM
you.
again. 50, can you believe it's 50 years, Alice?
No, I can't, Fran. I can't believe it at all. I don't know where the years have gone, and I suppose I was just thinking, if I can tell you about a man I met there a few weeks ago. He was standing outside the Ivy, and I was going by, and he was smoking a cigarette, and he was looking into space, and he said, "Oh, it's Alice, is it?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you know, I used to go down to you about 30 years ago." And then he said, "I got into the Ivy, and then I got a flat." And I said, "And what are you doing over here?" He said, "I'm just reminiscing." So that's what I'm doing now, Fran.
And I'm delighted you're reminiscing. And the book is sort of reminiscing. It's a kind of a scrapbook, is it not, Alice?
It is. It's very different. Now, how it came about is, now, you know Mick Clifford, that wonderful journalist,
yes.
and Mark Condren, of course, who is an amazing photographer. And we were just talking here, because I've paper cuttings, I've all the stuff over the years, and letters to HSE and all of that, and we decided to put it into a book form. And actually, when you look at the book, it is very different, and you will see that what we were doing 50 years ago, we are still doing today, and we're asking the same questions today. But it's, and then there are contributions from a number of people have written a piece about our work, and then there are articles that different people, like Patsy McGarry, you know, that well-known journalist, was with the press at the time, who wrote about somebody homeless. And then I came across a letter that I got from the Catholic Welfare Bureau in Harcourt Street. Now, they were gone long ago. But there was a man living in the London hospital, and he was 30 years away from Dublin, and he wanted to come home. And the social worker was trying to make sure that when he came back to Ireland, he had accommodation. Now, that was years ago. Mm-hmm. And then we have an up-to-date one where the two lads in Pearse Street took Romy back to Mauritius to be reunited with his family, having spent 12 years sleeping rough on the streets of Dublin. So there are common threads going right through it all up to today.
However, the Ireland that the Trust was formed in was kind of different, and you put some statistics in the book, I know, Alice, like 95% of people were Catholic, for example, 0.03 were non-religious, and 91% attended Mass in the country. So it was a very different country.
It was a very different country, and what I was also looking at, I was just thinking over the weekend, because I need to get some bullet points done for tomorrow. But you see, Ireland was very different. We had, for instance, around here, there were lots of churches. The churches could remain open, and people could go in, and many did and spend time in them. And the religious, of course, ran a lot of the food centres and places around town for people who were homeless. And of course, that has all changed. But we also had the voluntary hospitals, where there were wonderful social workers who were very grounded in the community, and they knew everyone going in. And also, some of the people who were maybe going to sleep rough might go into the casualty department. I know that's not what casualty departments are for, but there was always a welcome for people. And then we had a TB clinic up the road, and that's gone. We had a dental clinic, and that's gone. Yet we need all of those things now. So one of the reasons that we thought it was important to do this, because I think we have a great capacity to kind of keep moving on without sitting back and questioning, have things improved or have they not? No, I'm not into kind of saying things were marvellous and wonderful in the past, because there was grinding poverty and there were all kinds of issues, and there are all kinds of issues today. But I think we need to sit back and look, and the planners and the politicians need to look back and say, Is there anything we could have benefited from the past experience, and why are we not using it?
And who were the people you were helping back there in the mid-70s? Because I suppose drugs wasn't as big an issue as it is now. So who were these people, Alice?
Well, one of the interesting things about they were all Irish, all the people we met, and they were mainly men, and a lot of them were maybe single men who came from rural Ireland, some of them who had lost jobs, some of them worked. But what also happened, you see, was shortly before we started working in the field, that's when the reformatories closed down, and you had Dangan and Letterfrack and Artane, and of course they were in prisons where there was a certain sentence set. This was, if people going into the reformatory, their length of time there was based on how they were improving or not improving. Yet some of the poor people who went through those places, they would have seen it as a prison or worse. And also I felt, Fran, I was thinking one time, I never saw any of those people laugh. They were sad people who had suffered terribly. And then they were I met people from all walks of life who ended up homeless, and people never realise how easy it is to become homeless. And now, of course, we have huge numbers of people coming from other countries. For instance, now in October, we had people from 23 different countries coming in here, and many of them who have been coming to us for years, and they have exactly the same problems as our people who find themselves homeless. But there is another issue. You see, we know we have a huge housing problem, and that will only be solved when the builders, the developers, the politicians, the planners all get together and say, come on, we need to sort this out. And we also have families who are now becoming homeless, and that never happened in the past. We have huge mental health issues, and we've become very, everything is kind of tick a box and cut and paste, and that's the end of the problem. We've lost the capacity to sit down with people and give time to people and find out what can be done. And also, we don't place enough value on the hands-on work of frontline workers. And I think that is very obvious in the delivery of services.
And in the whole discussion around housing and homelessness, you said a very interesting thing, Alice. You said homelessness isn't really about housing, because there will always be people who don't fit in.
And that's true. And it always was the case, and it will be the case. Most of the people we work with, they would see they are complete outsiders. They were... Ralph McTell, of course,
sure.
You're a singer, Fran. Ralph McTell, when he wrote The Streets of London, he said it wasn't about homelessness, but it was about people who were living in society but outside of society. And I think actually that's what homelessness is about. It's very hard to understand how somebody in all kinds of weather is contented living in isolation under a bridge and won't go into a hostel, maybe where there is accommodation. But often people are very afraid in the hostels, and staff working in the hostels are very often afraid now because of the drugs people are taking. And that's a huge problem, and of course it's a problem right throughout the country.
Indeed it is. And those people who choose to live outside of society then, as who are they? I mean, is it mental health issues, or what is it?
Well, Fran, if I could answer that question, I have more questions than answer. And sometimes it's nearly too easy to say it is a mental health problem, because I have a huge issue around our delivery of mental health services. I mean, we had a time when you could take people up to a psychiatric hospital, and if they needed it, and all you have to do is read the papers every day and see families struggling, trying to get help for people, and poor people who have serious mental health issues and cannot get into hospital. But we all were in favour of the closure of the psychiatric hospitals. But all happened was, as happened in America, people were moved into hostels that were cheaper to run. And now what's happening, the people are being moved out of the hostels out to live in so-called supported accommodation in the community. And very often they have no support to get used to living in the community. And you often have communities struggling to get help to make sure the people who've been moved into their community have the help they need. So there are huge issues around our psychiatric services. But I think sometimes it's too easy to say just because somebody is sleeping out, they're mentally ill. And the cure to mental illness, sadly, in so many cases, is there's a pill for every ill, and it'll solve the problem. A lot of the people, I was thinking recently of Kevin. Kevin came from Limerick, and his last words with me, and I probably mentioned it on your programme before, was going out the door here. And he said to me, Alice, he said, you'll have to come down to Thomond Park, he said, because you don't know the difference between the Magners League and the Heineken Cup. And that night, wasn't he knocked down by a car, and he died. But he used to walk from Dublin down to Glenstowell for Christmas and loved the walk down. We have people who come in here from Bray, from County Meath, from people who are sleeping out in tents, and some of them would inspire you in a way because they seem to be just getting on with their life. And, when there's pressure put on people to conform, you're kind of meant to live in a society where you do what somebody else tells you to do. So I think a lot of the people we're talking about are real free spirits. And many of them are making no demands on the taxpayer or on society. And some of them are just getting on with their lives.
Of all the people over the years, I know some people stand out for whatever reasons, and I was really taken with reading Rosalind's story, for example. A remarkable woman who got herself together, but it still ended in tragedy, sadly, Alice.
Yeah, and that is the sadness of it. The first time she came in here, there was a man with her, and the two of them were living in a shed somewhere. And often when there's an uncomfortable relationship, there's no discussion, and we don't pry. But then she came in one day herself, and it was clear that she was running away from someone, and she had a cat. So anyway, she had a shower and she washed her hair, and I got on to the Legion Mary Hospital. And at that time too, you see, it was much easier to get people into accommodation. Now you have to go through all kinds of hoops and circles, but the DRHE are very good in Dublin. But eventually, anyway, she got into the Legion Mary Hospital, and she had a wonderful voice. And they'd a choir there, and she started singing, and she started helping out there, and then she moved into a flat. And then I woke up on Saturday morning and heard in the news there'd been a fire in this flat over near Croke Park, and there poor Rosaline was in the fire and she was burned. And I sadly heard there was a fire in Clonmel this morning when I was listening to the news. And at the funeral there was just the guard and a nun and the undertaker and ourselves. So you don't know what happens in someone's life. And, when I read about people missing and you're wondering how they're going to be found, and sometimes we get calls from people to know if we came across somebody, it really is all about human life. And there was another man recently, Peter Torring, and Peter was 10 years coming into us, and he would come in, he slept out, he'd come in and he'd soak his feet after a night out, he'd look in the mirror, he'd have a cup of tea, he'd start tapping his feet to music coming from Lyric FM, and there might be a crowded room and he'd still be there, and he was never a problem. And the last time he came into us, he was battered and bruised, and we knew he had walked out of hospital. This was just a few months ago, and we pleaded with them to take him up to hospital. He wouldn't go, and I rang the guards on Pierce Street, who were very good to us, and I said, look, will you look out for him, because he's going to be found dead under a bush or under a bridge, and he'll make headlines on the paper. And that night he ended up in hospital and he died a short time later. Anyway, nobody knew exactly where he came from. And I'm not even sure poor Peter knew himself where he came from. Nobody, none of the services, the DRHE, other great agencies who are working, nobody knew where he came from. So we got on to the coroner's office and we said we would bury him in our plot. And we have a plot in Glasnevin which was given to us by the Glasnevin Trust. And incidentally, a feathered man, Mervyn Colville, is in a very senior position up there. So Mervyn and the undertaker and an Agustinius priest, Padraig Daly, who's from Dungarvan. He's a poet. And Mick Clifford and ourselves, we buried him in our plot. But nobody knew, I'd say he didn't know himself where he came from. And I think we're going to meet a lot more people like that.
Does it, I mean, you're one of the most positive people I know, and you're always cheerful and you're always up for a laugh and stuff. Did it ever get you down over the years, Alice, or seem hopeless? Or
Well, I suppose, Fran, there would have been times, and I suppose some mornings we'd say to ourselves, what in the name of God are we doing, you know? But then something good will always happen. And I'm a great believer, you see, you can't change the world, but you can do your own little bit. And people are so good to us. And every day something good. It might be somebody dropping in to maybe ring you up or cheer you up. And then there are some very heavy days, but there's always the balance. And I have wonderful, wonderful people working with me. They're just, you could find me with a mop here, or you could find me talking to somebody very important or thought they were important. And we all get on very well here, and we work as a team, so that if an issue arises that is troubling some of us, and so if somebody is nasty to us, somebody coming in, we realise it's not us they're being nasty. There's something that's troubling them. But also, we're very clear here. We make sure everyone is treated with respect, including the staff. And I think treating people as adults is important, because sometimes people are inclined to think you have to do everything for people, and you kind of mollycoddle them like children. You have to treat them like adults. And yes, I suppose I'm very lucky. I have great staff. I'm just getting with my life, and of course, I love sport, and sport is a huge. Have we got another minute?
Of course we have. Of course we have.
A few years ago, it's a good number of years ago, I was in Backlane Hostel, and there was a man sitting there on his own, and I went up to him. Paddy was his name, and he was from Cork. And I thought, well, this is great now. I will mention the Munster final to him. And I said, Paddy, I still remember going to the Munster finals. There was never anything like Cork and Tipperary, and there was no reaction. So I knew there was something wrong. And then he told me he'd been reared in an institution and spent the rest of his life, until he went to the hostel, sleeping in a shed in a farm down the country. And he never got to see a match. And then more recently, we had Noel, who used to live in the Ivy, wonderful man, great with his hands, and he got an apartment overhead where we were here, and he'd come down to us regularly. Now, he was wonderful with his hands, but he was very ill, and we knew he wasn't long for this world. And when he ended up in James's, he wouldn't speak to anyone. He wouldn't speak to his sister. He wouldn't speak to the Ivy staff. Just wouldn't speak to anyone. So I got on, the Ivy staff asked me would I get on to him, because they knew I got on well with them. So I rang up the hospital, and I don't know how long I was on the phone, trying to explain to the person at the other end, no, I wasn't his doctor, I wasn't his nurse, I wasn't his next of kin, but I said, he knows me and I know he will speak to me. So after about half an hour, she reluctantly got on to him, and he said, oh yes, to tell me to go up. So the next morning, I went up with one of the Ivy staff. This was just last year. And out he came, being pushed out by a man in his scrubs, and he was sulking and he wasn't speaking to me, and I knew he loved soccer. So I said, God, Noel, Chelsea aren't doing very well, but I said, have you been looking at Mo Salah? Now, mind you, he's not doing that well now. And with that, the doctor's eyes lit up, and he said, oh, Mo Salah from my country, Egypt. And the rest is history, because the two of them started chatting away, and he spoke to the staff, he spoke to his relations, and then he passed away peacefully maybe a few weeks later. But I think one of the things that's very important in our work, you have to look beyond housing. And I think people, professionals, they're inclined to just look at the little box they're working in, and they don't look beyond it. And also there are people who still remember the stigma of the poorhouse. But if you said that now to somebody young, they wouldn't know what you were talking about.
They wouldn't.
And that's why we felt it was important to document something on the 50 years, because homelessness just didn't start a few years ago when all the money came on stream and all the experts came about with all the solutions. You know, it is about the human condition and how we treat each other.
You've deliberately kept the trust small and manageable. You're not grant aided, for example. You don't actively involve yourself in fundraising. Now, we saw recently, sadly, what happened with the whole Peter McVerry thing as well. Was that very deliberate over the years, Alice, that you kept it manageable?
Well, I suppose as well as we've always had a wonderful board of directors, and we're fully compliant with and always were with government legislation. But in an ideal world, we felt we shouldn't be here. I mean, we thought after a year working with homeless people 50 years ago, we'd have solved the problem. But if things get too big, all the energy go, and the services are there for everyone to use, and people who are homeless should have access to all of those services. But when more money came on stream, our model of service, because we employed a doctor in the early days, our model of service has been used now, because there are now our doctors and nurses going into the hostels. But it freed us up to spend more time with people, because at the end of the day, it's about giving time. Now, as I'm on to you now there's one man sitting out in the front room, and he started, he started coming to us about, I'm just going to take a drop of water.
No problem, Alice.
A few months ago. Now, if you met this man on the street, he'd be a bit like what Ralph McTell was writing about. He would be looking into space and didn't interact with anyone. And Mark said to me one day, he said, "No, Alice, that man is very shy." And now he comes in nearly every morning. He comes in, he greets us, he tells us what the weather is like, he stays for a while, he's smiling. And if you're small, you can give that bit more time to people. And I think agencies have got so big, and they have to have the staff, because they have so much to do in the line of filling in forms and all of that, that all their energies can go into that, and then they have to look for money to keep their agencies going. And you see, it also does mean, the state has very nicely offloaded the responsibility of housing to housing bodies, yes. And it also in the area of health services. So a serious discussion needs to take place around all of that. But I think small agencies are very, very important. But in the scheme of things then, if you're very small, you're not likely to be consulted when important things or so-called important things are happening, or decisions and plans are being made. But I think there are small agencies throughout the country doing invaluable work, and they shouldn't be taken for granted.
Well, there's no danger that you should be taken for granted anyway, that's for sure. Since we last spoke, you lost your lovely husband, Charlie. How are you, Alice? How are you getting on?
I'm very lucky. I'm grand, thank God. And I suppose nursing has helped me too, because, when I was growing up, I looked after some of my grandnaunts when they were lying or that, death is part of life. I would at times feel alone, very alone, but people have been very good to me, and I do believe that, I don't know what it is about our life, but I think there is a mystery to life, that you have that connection with that spirit from another world.
And you're still connecting with him then, are you, Alice? Do you feel that he's around you?
I do. I was chatting with somebody recently, and they were just saying, Mary Heaney said to somebody about Seamus when he died, yeah. And she said, "Oh no, he's with me, but he's speaking to me from a different place." And I suppose I found that interesting. I know it might sound a bit daft to people, but isn't there a mystery to the world we don't understand at all? What is it all about? I don't know. But yes, I've been very, and Charlie's stepson and his wife, they're very good to me, and I'm very independent as well, and I have good neighbours, and I can get lost in a book and listen to music and switch off for a while.
Well, the book is called Outsiders. I presume it's in all the usual bookstores at this point.
No, it's not.
Is it not?
We publish this ourselves, and it's on sale in Alan Hanna's in Rathmines, and the information is on our website.
Very good. So people can buy it by
And
post,
Fran,
I guess.
Before I go,
Yeah.
can I say hello to all our supporters around Tipperary and thank them and wish a happy Christmas to everyone. And sure, I'll get down to Tip between this and Christmas, please God.
Well, we look forward to seeing you as always. Alice, you look out. Many congrats on the 50 years and on the book. Lovely to talk to you, Alice.
Thanks, Fran.
Thank you.
Thanks for everything.
Thank you. Bye-bye,
now.
Duff. Bye-bye. That's the wonderful Alice Leahy of the Alice Leahy Trust. The book is called Outsiders. If you want to go online, you'll find out some information there as to how you can pick it up. But it's well worth a look. Like lots in it that I didn't know. Maybe many of you are aware that homeless people were being paid to participate in drug trials back in the 1980s. Which was incredible. In other words, at least one death involved in that. But in the book, Alice covers the whole business that, RTE didn't want to cover that story, even though it was huge news at the time. But some very brave journalists managed to get it out there finally. But that's a remarkable part of our history as well. We'll take a break. We're back with more in just a moment.
Tip FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage Puckon. Now is the time to pick up your next van. From the award-winning Peugeot Partner van to the Expert and the load-lugging Boxer van. We have big vans, high-roof vans, long wheelbase vans. You'll find them all at Slattery's Garage Puckon. See slatterysgarage.ie.